On this episode of Locked On Lightning, the Lightning win in Jersey. Is it a bit of a surprise? I'll tell you why. But first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. This episode of Locked On Lightning is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we're getting started by talking really not so much about what happened last night, but kind of the nature of what happened surrounding the Lightning win. All the little pieces came together. I stressed out in the last episode that was going to be the key for this game. It wasn't going to be Steven Stamkos so much. It wasn't going to be so much Nikita Kucherov, even though Kuch did score in this game. It was going to be the little guys, led in part also by Andrei Vasilevskiy. Stopped 22 of 23 shots. Played a fantastic game against a very good hockey team. But I think we could kind of all agree. Now, maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm being a little bit negative here or had a little bit of a negative mindset coming into this game. And that is, to be honest, I was surprised that they won this game. And maybe that was just me. Maybe that was just me thinking, okay, this is, as always, as we always go into a game against a good team where the Lightning seem like, even though in recent games, they've been obviously not have been playing well over the last stretch. The month of March has been nothing but hard and bumpy road for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They came into this game 3-5-2 over their last 10, and really, they were beating the teams that they should beat for the most part, except for really that loss against Buffalo early on in the fourth. Losing to very good hockey teams, losing tight games to hockey teams, most notably Pittsburgh, most notably Vegas, most notably Winnipeg, and recently got outplayed by Carolina, who now all of a sudden things have changed. Looks like that they may not be a front runner to win the Stanley Cup, or at least one of the front runners, with the injury to Andrei Vasilevskiy. But as we always say, following a Lightning loss, is that we expect them to come back big in a big way. To even in that game against Winnipeg, like I said on the previous episode, I thought that they played well. I thought they played a sustainable form of hockey where if the little guys come through, when I mean the little guys, I mean Alex Killorn, I mean Brandon Hagel, I mean Nick Paul, Anthony Cirelli. And that is no disrespect towards them, but that is in comparison to the Lightning Big Three and Steven Stamkos, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov, the guys that you expect to come out. Now, obviously, Stamkos has been just banged up and, just hasn't been looking like himself over the last couple of games. And, didn't play in this one. So, which you kind of expected after everything that, especially after that hit he suffered the other night where he left and, his knee just, you always get scared when a player like that, takes a hit like that and has an injury like that, especially at this point in his career, Stamkos, so especially being susceptible to injuries the way he has. But really, I'm surprised because normally this isn't a game that the Lightning win. The Lightning, it has been documented. I mean, you could look back on this season alone. The Lightning struggle against young teams that are having a ton of success. Maybe some might say are a little bit ahead of where a lot of people projected them in terms of expectations. You look at the Buffalo Sabres, a team in which the Lightning have a very familiar history with this entire season. Have struggled against them immensely this season. You could look at a team like the New Jersey Devils, first time meeting them, quite honestly, and like I said, this is where the negativity, the almost intrusive thoughts come into play. I fully expected them to be outplayed and outclassed last night, and they proved me wrong, and I'm happy that they proved me wrong. Let me know in the comments below because, what was your expectations? Honestly, nobody's going to nobody's going to rag on you if you thought that they were going to lose or that they were going to win or whatever. I'm just saying that by now we should all have a feel for this team. And my feeling for this team is that this is the game where they get overwhelmed early on. And I spoke about it on the last pod how the equation to winning is very simple for this team. It is something that if you dig down deep and you just put your head down and you pull your socks up, you should be able to go out there and execute. And the Lightning did that last night. Everybody was involved. Like I said, Anthony Cirelli came up big. Brandon Hagel came up big. Goal from Alex Killorn. And then, of course, just for good measure, Nikita Kucherov. And the one thing that the Lightning needed the most to happen happened. And that's Andrei Vasilevskiy showing up, and I believe in a very vintage performance for him in net. So hopefully we see him tomorrow night. Now I'm recording this very late Wednesday night, but hopefully you all see it. We'll be having a podcast, another episode dropping before the game tomorrow. So, reach out for, keep a lookout for that. But this was the game that Lightning fans going forward should look back on. And, some of you might think differently about the Devils now. They're not the big bad Devils of the Metropolitan Division. And you know what? They're still a team that I feel like the Lightning should respect in upcoming games. So we'll talk more about the Lightning season as a whole because you know what? Like really, how do we expect this team to play going forward? And my guess is it's going to be a very bumpy road. I mean, there is some kind of, I guess, a relief of pressure going forward because if you look at what happens with the Toronto Maple Leafs played tonight against the Colorado Avalanche. Last time I checked in on the game, they were tied at 1, and checking up the score right now, they're in the middle of a shootout as we speak. So 1-1 against the Avalanche. Take that as you leave it, depending on how you feel about the Avalanche. I still think that's a very competitive game for the Toronto Maple Leafs, even though their Ryan O'Reilly trade is pretty much null and void because he's out for the time being with an issue with his finger. I believe he tore a ligament or broke his finger. I don't remember which one it was to be exact. And then we have the Carolina Hurricanes, not necessarily an immediate opponent for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but another team where that could very well change the landscape of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'm curious to see what Lightning fans think about that as well. So, we'll talk about the rest of the season as a whole for the Lightning. What kind of performance are we expecting going forward from them in just a little bit? But first, I want to talk about one of today's sponsors, and that is our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, in case you haven't heard, it's the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's America's #1 sportsbook because new customers get a free no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the app, and it's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you could bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and goals scored, whatever you want to bet on. for the Lightning's game against the New Jersey Devils tomorrow night. You could pretty much bet on, saves. You could bet on if Vasilevskiy is going to get a shutout, or who the over/under on points for Braden Point, for Nikita Kucherov. You name it, they definitely have odds on it. I love it. I love this app. I always like to place little bets here and there, especially on the Lightning in the third period, because that's where this team really comes alive. Winning in terms of just overall goals scored. So you definitely want to do that. The Lightning are one of the best teams in terms of scoring in the third period. So that's definitely where you want to put your money. Put money on tomorrow night's game that the Lightning are going to outscore New Jersey Devils in the third period. I guarantee you it's almost a sure thing. And if you don't, you get your no sweat first bet if you're a new customer. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, moving on, talking about the rest of the season, because, it's going to be over before you know it for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games left in the month of March. One more against the Devils here this week in Jersey. And then it's back home against Montreal, and then a familiar foe in the New Jersey Devils 3 times in 1 week. That still baffles my mind. Still blows my mind. And then you're going up to Canada for a 2-game slate against Montreal and Ottawa, Boston, Carolina, and then back home for Washington. And then April, I always feel like April is just always a difficult month for the Lightning. Obviously the the playoffs are for the most part pretty much wrapped up in terms of trying to qualify for the playoffs. But my thing is I feel like the league, and maybe this is just me, I'm not looking at other schedules, so take that as you please. But I feel like the league, at least for the Lightning, makes it somewhat difficult for them in the last stretch of things now. 2 years ago, little different, obviously, because of the weird schedule with the divisions. We weren't playing Canadian teams. They were all in their other division. But if you look at this last month of April, depending on where you are in your mindset with the Tampa Bay Lightning, you might feel a certain type of way about this. You might look at this as, oh crap, this is not going to be a good tune-up for the playoffs. This could be a definite mood killer going into it. But if you're like me, who, even though I am somewhat at times negative, as we all know from the beginning of this podcast, this episode tonight, my thing is that, if the Lightning end up not playing well in the last couple of weeks of March, there's not only a perfect opportunity to turn it around, you have more games to play. You have 6 to round out the rest of the season, but you have an opportunity to do it against very good teams. New York Islanders, who are on the verge of a playoff spot, on the outside of the wild card looking in. New York Rangers, you got them, who are definite playoff team, who has a boatload of talent, a potential future opponent during this playoff run. You got Ottawa, a scrappy young team. That's going to be a really interesting game, I think, for the Lightning. Last matchup for the season for these two teams up in Ottawa. I feel like there's, and we see it already at this point in time in the season, where teams are starting to get tired of each other. They're like, enough is enough. Let's drop the gloves and go, which is why it's great to have guys like Mikey Eyssimont, like Tanner Jeannot, like Pat Maroon, like Corey Perry. There's a lot of players on this team that aren't afraid to throw down the gloves, so not even worried about that. But you can never have too much physicality on your team, as long as you have a nice balance of guys who could also score on that team. And then we round out things with Toronto and Detroit, which I love. I might be a little crazy in saying this, but I love it. I absolutely love it that we get to see Toronto just one more time before the playoffs. And I think what we're gonna see, and this might be negative, for a negative, observation on my end, at least, but I really think that the next couple of weeks, in terms of consistent performance, in terms of record for the Lightning, in terms of the stretch of 10, we might see something similar to what we saw of the Lightning's last 10, 3, 5, and 2, going into last night's game against the Devils. I would not be surprised if the Lightning go into tomorrow night's game and absolutely lay a big egg. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a tough go again of it against the Canadians on Saturday. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a tight one where really it's really becomes the Lightning's game to lose, or you know where it's a game where you feel like they're going to lose, where they're back against the corner and they just pull it out of their hat on Sunday against the Devils. And I feel like that for the rest of the week. Honestly, I see the same thing with Ottawa. I see the same thing. Honestly, I don't see a good result from Boston. I don't think the Lightning are there right now. I just think also Boston is just leagues better, again, better than the Lightning, which is perfectly a reasonable thing to say and think. Look at the two rosters. Look at the records of the teams. Look at just the points in general. And on the other side of that, the only game where I mean, I could also see the Lightning beating Carolina. I think they might feel a little defeated now with the season-ending injury to Andrei Svechnikov. I just think that, even though he's not, he is one of the best players on the team, but he's not a player I necessarily feel is going to make or break their chances. I mean, their chances will go down significantly for a deep cup run. But I think that team is so deep in terms of regular season play. That team is so deep for Carolina that I still think that that's going to be a very tough game. Also considering all the issues that the Lightning have had over the last couple of weeks and let's face it, and months. Just, some issues on their back end. I think I spoke about it a little bit on the last episode, just how the Lightning I feel like, have still not found their identity on the defensive side of things. Victor Hedman just having issues left and right here throughout the course of the season. But Kyle Sergachev more so the offensive minded of the decor. And Eric Chernak was always a good second option on the defensive side of things to Ryan McDonagh, now being the number one guy in that regard, in my opinion, on this team, a role in which I don't think that he has really settled into fully, or allowed himself to fully slide into. So I think that there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and I still think that those questions need to be answered on these last couple of weeks of the season, and I think that we are going to see those questions still needing to be answered as we get into the final games of April. So we'll keep an eye on that. I think, honestly, I'm not trying to be the speller of doom here for Lightning Nation, but it's going to be a bumpy road over the next couple of weeks for Lightning fans and this team. And I really think that we just all have to be patient and trust the process, but also be realistic with ourselves and not think that we're going to, go 10-2 or whatever, just have a phenomenal record over the next. I think that these are, the Lightning, if they pull out of these last couple of weeks with a 500 record, I think that's something that this team will be able to be proud of, to going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll obviously talk more about that as the season comes to a close for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we'll keep an eye on that and talk to our friends right now at Built Bar. Now, if you've been around in the show for a long time, you know that Built Bar has a bunch of flavors to choose from. They have churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, And the best part about them for years we've been talking about is that you could order their bars at built.com. But guess what? Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab a box of Built bars. You could pick up a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. So if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie, batter, and churro. You could thank me later. So wrapping things up, yeah, like I said, I'm not trying to be overly negative here. I think that, Stamkos has fallen off a little bit. Kucherov is going to have his bad games. That's just bound to happen. It's going to happen. Point, still think he's very much on track to get 50. I think if he gets 50, I think he'll be at by the skin of his teeth, which is fine. I mean, that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's still a great, and even if he doesn't get it, I mean, hovering around the 50 goal mark for a season is still phenomenal. He reached the career high in goals. I think we could agree that this year has been Braden Point's breakout season. So that's great. But keep your eye on the lower tier players, the lower lines, the Tanner Janot's, the Brandon Hagels, the Nick Pauls, the Ross Colton, those guys, Alex Killorn, those are the guys, Anthony Cirelli, then the list goes on. Really, the guys that I've mentioned just now, those are the guys that are really going to have to come up big for the Lightning in the playoffs. It just can't revolve around Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov. What are they going to do tonight? Obviously we didn't have that issue last year as well. Nick Paul absolutely lost his mind in the playoffs. And I would expect him, he's been playing frustrated a little bit here and there, trying to force things. I would really like to see him kind of just go out there, let the game come to him, let him go through the ebbs and flows of the games. And, because he's a talented enough player to where if you rely on your instincts, and he has pretty good instincts, if he relies on his instincts, I think he'll be fine. I think the goals will start to come here and there. The points will start to come here and there. And I'm glad that he's playing on the wing now. We've seen him take some action here and there throughout the course of the season down the middle. Obviously, with the absence of Anthony Cirelli, he had to. But I'm glad that he's out on the wing now. It's going to allow him to be able to go out and get a lot more scoring chances on the wing because he has a good shot. He has a good wrist there. So for him to be able, and then even, on the other side of that, Alex Killorn, a player who's been really coming on lately. And that's the good thing about that second line. Cirelli and Paul and Killorn really could all go down the middle when they need to, if the situation calls for it, and you won't have to worry about them. And so really the Lightning going down the stretch of the final season, they should approach every game, like I've said probably a million times in the last month, that they need to approach every game like it's a playoff game. And what I mean by that is that they need to go out and allow the game to develop for every guy, because that's not how you win a playoff game if you're relying on 2 to 3 single players here and there. You need to rely on your entire team, and that's really what it comes down to. So I'm excited, especially for the month of April, that final 6 games that the Lightning have, because it will be one of the toughest stretches the Lightning will have had, I think, all season. And yeah, it was a little bit of a bumpy start to this season, but like the old saying goes, it's not how you start, it's about how you finish. And I really think that this Lightning team, as long as they finish 500, they'll be in good shape for the beginning of the Stanley Cup playoffs against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we'll be back tomorrow to preview tomorrow's game against the New Jersey Devils. We'll talk about more what entails on that game. Can we expect Steven Stamkos to be in the lineup for that? We'll talk about all of that and more on the next one. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.